Today, we're going on an excursion. Are you coming along? We're leaving the office and taking advantage of this incredibly sunny day to record a guide, a super guide, where I want to talk to you in detail about the digital nomad residency here in Spain. And I'll also take the opportunity to show you a little piece of my beautiful homeland, which, as some of you know, is Murcia. And the fact is, Murcia is one of the places that many digital nomads choose to settle in this country. They choose it for the beach, the tranquility, the climate, its beautiful inland villages, and of course, for its people, who, as I always say, are among the friendliest in Spain. Well, maybe the Andalusians beat us when it comes to friendliness, but still just by a little. Today, I'm here to talk to you about a visa, a special residency that was introduced in Spain in 2023 and has served as an excellent way for many foreign citizens to establish their residence in this country. And moreover, in many cases, accompanied by their families. Foreign individuals who usually work remotely and who meet certain stringent and specific eligibility requirements, some of which have changed quite a bit this year. And that is exactly why this guide was very necessary, to update the information for you. Because those of you who have been following me for a while will know that I have other guides that talk about the digital nomad residency, but those are from previous years. This visa is a solution that in just 3 years has become one of the most popular ways to obtain legal residency in Spain without having to go through the tedious and much slower traditional channels. And why is that? Well, because the digital nomad residency offers too many advantages. Spain aims to attract talent to this country and in return grants a series of benefits. For example, when it comes to processing times, the decisions are practically express. In a very short time, you can have your residency granted in Spain. You can also apply from here without having to go through the complex consular processes. You could come accompanied by your family members, as I mentioned earlier, and you will also be able to obtain a 3-year renewable residency. And what's more, if you come from a Latin American country, after 2 years of residency, you can apply for Spanish citizenship. It is without a doubt one of the most comprehensive options available and also one of the ones we have processed the most in my firm. My firm specializes entirely in this type of residency. And this video I'm making today, I can tell you with complete confidence, is based on real, extensive experience with results that many other firms would envy. No intention to discredit anyone, okay? How are you? How are you all doing? My name is Maria Cardona. Some of you already know me. I am a lawyer, an expert in immigration, Spanish nationality, and international mobility, with a professional office in this humble city called Murcia, which many of you still don't know, but today I'm going to show you a little bit of it. And from my humble office, we advise people from all over Spain and all over the world, people who are already here and want to regularize their situation, apply for their nationality, bring their family members over, or people who are still abroad and dream of coming to live in this beautiful country. The Spanish dream. How many of you dream of or wish to come live in Spain? Come on, raise your hand. I'm sure there are many of you. Welcome to my channel, if you didn't know it yet. Then if you are already regular followers, thank you so much for watching me again. It is a pleasure and an honor to have you here once again. I have to say I have excellent followers. And as for clients, I can't even begin to tell you. At the office, we get some of the very best. And now we're closing up and heading out on the road. Right now, we're on the RM12 highway, better known as the La Manga highway, and we're heading towards the coast to La Manga del Mar Menor. La Manga is a coastal strip, okay? It's about 22 kilometers long, located on the warm coast in the region of Murcia. And this strip separates the Mediterranean Sea from the Mar Menor. And what is this Mar Menor? Well, look, it's a unique coastal lagoon since it offers the possibility of choosing between two seas on the same strip of land. It's a saltwater lagoon, very shallow, with very warm water for those who like it hot. It feels like a spa, very calm, with no waves and perfect for water sports. It's a place chosen by many tourists and also by many people to live all year round, although in winter it's much quieter. As soon as we can see the landscape of this strip of land that divides these two seas, I'll show it to you so you can visualize it, see it, and understand what I'm talking about. But in the meantime, I'm going to tell you what you're going to learn today with this guide, this detailed guide that I want to give you, where we're going to talk about digital nomad residencies here in Spain. Take a look. I'll start by explaining what this digital nomad residency is, okay? What it's about, who can apply for it. I'll talk about the requirements, what requirements are needed to apply, and the possibility of coming with family members. I'll clarify from where you can apply for this residency and where I personally recommend doing it. I'll explain the application process and the response times. Very important. I'll address the topic of paying taxes in Spain and self-employment contributions. I'll talk to you about the famous Beckham Law, since there's a lot of misinformation about it. We'll reveal whether or not it's necessary to take out private insurance, which is another topic surrounded by misinformation. Another issue that concerns families is the schooling of minor children in Spain. Is it possible? I'll talk about renewals and modifications as well. I'll also discuss the possibility of applying for Spanish citizenship. Very interesting. I'll explain the possibility of revocation of the nomad residency and the most common reasons for losing this residency. I'll also talk about the reasons for denial and the appeals that can be filed against these denials. And finally, of course, my final recommendation, which can't be missed, so stay until the end. See? I've pulled over a little to the side of the highway, and here I'm showing you the strip of land that separates the Mar Menor from the Mediterranean Sea. You can't see it very well from here. The sea you see is the Mar Menor. And well, they took advantage of this strip of land to build as much as possible. Super tall buildings in a very small space on very little land. They filled it up. In the end, it's a hive of buildings, but that doesn't take away from the fact that it has wonderful beaches and a unique landscape in this region. So what do you think? This will be the most complete guide you've ever seen on this topic, I assure you. The Great Guide by Maria. Anyone who has followed me for a while knows that I don't like to give incomplete information. Either I give it all or I don't do anything at all. So if you're ready to receive a ton of information, stay tuned, because we're starting now. Ready? Well, let's get started. That's it, we've arrived at La Manga. This is the entrance to the strip of land I showed you. And well, let's see if we can find a quiet little beach. Since it's May, I suppose there won't be too many people around this time of year. And as you can see, it's a splendid day, super sunny. So we've stopped here. Look at these beautiful views, how lovely the sea looks today. Gorgeous. And from here, we're going to talk about the first point. First, I'm going to explain what this digital nomad residency is all about. Let's start with the foundation so we can support the whole structure, okay? The Digital Nomad Residency is a permit that will allow foreign citizens to live legally in Spain while working remotely from here. In addition, as I already mentioned, they will be able to come accompanied by their family members. That is, you can establish your residence in Spain, and in fact, you will be required to live in the country for at least 6 months a year. However, the company you work for will not be here. It must be based abroad. And pay attention to this because it's very important to point it out. That company also must not have a branch in Spain. So who can apply for this type of residency? If you're thinking about applying for the digital nomad visa and you're not sure if it applies to you, what I'm about to explain in just a few minutes will save you months of confusion, okay? Let's break it down. On one hand, salaried employees can apply for it. And here I have to point out, and I'm being very honest, that in our firm, we process far fewer residencies for salaried employees. That is, people who have an employment relationship with a company. Unless, of course, it's their own company, in which case we are absolute specialists. And self-employed workers can also apply for it, which is another area we are specialists in. These are freelancers, contractors, or independent professionals. In other words, our firm specializes in this type of self-employed professionals and in people who own their own company and telework for their own business. And here, it's important to understand something else. The type of contract that will link you to your company. In many of my consultations with clients, we focus precisely on clarifying this point because sometimes it's not so clear. Let me explain. An employee or salaried worker is someone who works for someone else. They have a contract, a set schedule, get paid vacation, and their social security contributions are covered. As I mentioned, we handle this type of arrangement less frequently, except when we're talking about employees of their own company. The self-employed person, on the other hand, is someone who manages their own business. Meanwhile, a freelancer is a self-employed person who takes on occasional projects, often for several clients. And on the other hand, a contractor is an independent contractor, but with a more ongoing relationship over time. This would be similar to what is called in Spain a false self-employed person, okay? And there tends to be quite a bit of confusion here because the lines between these roles can sometimes be blurry, but there are always certain elements that ultimately place each case into its proper category. And you might be wondering, Maria, why do you process fewer cases of employees who are not owners of their own company? Well, it's very simple. In that case, it is mandatory to obtain a certificate from the country of origin stating that it will be that country which assumes responsibility for the workers' social security during their stay in Spain. And in many countries, obtaining this certificate is quite complicated and in some cases practically impossible. The alternative would be for the foreign company to register with the Spanish Social Security system. But let me tell you something, in all these years, I haven't come across a single foreign company willing to do this process, okay? Another option that some clients have chosen is to change their status and switch from being an employee to being self-employed for this procedure. And other common questions that I usually clarify during consultations. You might ask, and Maria, if I work remotely for a foreign company, can I also work for a Spanish company? Well, yes, you can, but there is a very clear limit. What you earn in Spain cannot exceed more than 20% of your total income. That is, 80% of your income must still come from abroad from the foreign company. And another clarification, not just any remote job will do, it has to be a real, demonstrable, and stable activity. In addition, you must prove that you have been working with that company or carrying out your activity for at least 3 months, and that the company you work for has been established for at least 1 year. If it hasn't been established for a year, you're out. And finally, a typical case. Can an influencer, for example, apply for the digital nomad visa in Spain? Well, it depends. If their income comes directly from platforms like YouTube, they would need to get that platform to sign a document authorizing them to work remotely from Spain. Imagine asking YouTube for this. Complicated, right? That's why, in these cases, the recommended approach would be to create a company, channel your income through that company, and then your own company would sign this authorization, allowing you to work remotely from Spain. But of course, if this company hasn't been created yet, then you'll have to wait a year of being in business before you can apply for the digital nomad residency in Spain. Is that clear to you? Because this point is key. So, in summary, any foreign person who is not a citizen of the European Union can apply for this residency if they meet these requirements. Who works remotely, has sufficient income, we'll talk about that later, has a real professional relationship with a foreign company, or has clients outside of Spain, and meets the rest of the requirements that we're about to go over. Let's continue. Requirements. Pay close attention because I'm going to list one by one the requirements you must meet to apply for this residency. If you're lucky enough to meet each of them, then get ready to pack your bags. Well, no, first confirm it with a professional, okay? The first requirement, the financial requirement, which is the one you're most interested in and the one that raises the most questions. To be able to apply for residency as a digital nomad in Spain, you will have to prove a minimum income. According to the latest updates for this year, 2026, the main applicant must prove a minimum gross monthly income of 2,850 euros. And if you are coming with family members, you will need to prove more. An additional 75% for the first family member, which is 1,069 euros, and an additional 25% for each extra and subsequent member, which is another 357 euros. Okay, let's take an example. A family of 4 members. So the main applicant must prove a total of 4,633 euros per month, 2,850 for the main applicant, 1,069 for the first accompanying family member, 357 for the third, and another 357 for the fourth. And regarding the matter of proving financial means, look, I'm going to talk to you about several scenarios so that it's absolutely clear. First, you have to keep in mind that they will ask us for bank statements from the 3 months prior to the application. Anyone who owns their own company will, on one hand, have the company's income in a business account, and on the other hand, will have the income they receive from their company transferred from the business account to their personal account. And it's the latter that they will require from us, okay? The ones from the personal account for the last 3 months. If one of these 3 months falls a bit short in terms of this amount and doesn't reach the required minimum, then from our office, we will recommend waiting 1 more month to see if the income increases a bit and we can submit a clean, solid application. We've also had cases where the person received the required amount, but on an annual basis. That is, if we multiply 2,850 euros by 12 months, we get an amount of 34,200. Well, there are people who receive this amount annually or in 2 or 3 installments. In that case, there wouldn't be a problem, okay? We would have to provide proof for the entire year and strengthen the application a bit more, but there would be no issue. The problem arises when the minimum income is not reached and we want to supplement it in some way. I'm going to make it clear what you can and cannot use to supplement it because there's a lot of confusion about this. For example, there are families who tell me, okay, between my husband and I, we earn the required amount and we're both freelancers. No, you cannot combine the income of spouses or any other family member. The person who must prove that income is the main applicant, period. Nor can we add passive income to the income from professional activity. Let's imagine that we receive a certain amount as self-employed workers, a monthly amount, or through our own company, whatever it may be, and that amount doesn't reach the required minimum. But in addition, we have a property for rent that provides us with a monthly income. Well, we can't add that rental income to reach the minimum, okay? So what could we use to supplement it? With savings, the applicant's own savings, but not just any amount. They must supplement the required amount for the 3 years of residency. So you have to do the math and do it very carefully, because if you're short, even by 100 euros, your application will be denied for lack of funds. And not just for 100, even for 20 euros, they'll deny it. No exceptions. Second requirement, you must prove that you have a real activity and that you will be able to continue carrying it out remotely. To prove this point, we will submit the contract, which must meet a series of requirements. We always analyze it with a magnifying glass. We will attach tax returns filed by the individual in their country of origin, their certificate as a self-employed worker for the last 3 months, for example, the ROT certificate from Colombia or the AFIP from Argentina. We will also submit a declaration expressing the intention to register as self-employed in Spain immediately after receiving the residence permit. And to prove that your company authorizes you to work remotely from Spain, my office prepares a letter that certifies this, and this letter must be signed by the company. Third requirement, to demonstrate that the company you work for or your own company has been established for at least 1 year. And for this, you must submit an official document that certifies it. Official. Fourth requirement, to have no criminal record in the country or countries where you have resided during the 5 years prior to the application. Although, in reality, we only need to present the criminal record certificate from the country or countries where we have resided during the 2 years prior to the application. And for the remaining years, a declaration in which the applicant states that they have no criminal record will suffice. That's it, done. Fifth requirement, extremely important as it is a common reason for denial. You must present a university degree related to the work you are performing. And if you do not have this degree, you must prove 3 years of experience in your sector. And be careful, this must be proven with official documents. Very important. Recommendation letters from companies alone will not be sufficient, understood? Be careful, they are very strict about this. Sixth requirement, not being in an irregular situation in Spain at the time of application. You must be within the 90 days of your tourist stay or already have been granted a student stay, for example, or another type of residence. They will only require that you are not in an irregular situation in Spain, and that's it. And of course, you must not be banned from entering Spain or any Schengen area countries. Be careful if you enter Spain from another Schengen country as well, because you will need to make what is called an entry declaration at the airport. This would be the list of general documents to prepare a digital nomad residence application file. I warn you, this is without prejudice to the fact that each case, each file may require more documentation or that the UGE may request additional documents. At the firm, we examine each case individually. We create a highly personalized list of documents for each client because every case is unique. But anyway, these requirements I've mentioned can serve as a clear initial guide for you. Look, now we're moving along once again. And I really wanted to take a moment to show you on the GPS screen exactly how this narrow strip of land I mentioned earlier looks. Do you see it there? It's super cool. This here would be the Mar Menor, and this is the Mediterranean Sea. Well, and look how far we are from home. And I live in the center of Murcia, so the coast is super, super close to downtown. It's a short trip, and you can get to the Murcian coast in no time. Look how beautiful it is and how nice it feels here. There are already people swimming, of course, mostly foreigners. We Spaniards are a bit more sensitive to the cold. And look how beautiful the Mar Menor lagoon is. This lagoon, as I told you, is salt water, and the water is very warm. I love it. And what you see there is one of the islands in the Mar Menor. In total, there are 5 volcanic islands with protected landscapes. That is Isla Mayor or Baron Island. Then there's Perdiguera Island, which I used to visit on boat trips when I was little. And then there are the smaller islands, Ciervo Island, Sujeto Island, and Redonda Island. It's just perfect today. And here is Goyi, who came with me on the trip. How could he have stayed at home? And well, from here, I'm going to explain the next section to you about accompanying family members. I've already mentioned the financial requirements needed to bring family members with the main applicant, and we've also talked about the documents that must be submitted in this case. But in this part of the video, I want to explain the process itself a bit and make it very clear when, at what point, we can submit the applications for accompanying family members, because it's very important to understand this. The whole family can travel together to Spain, enter as tourists, and all apply for the digital nomad residency at the same time. You submit the application for the main applicant and for the family members, and all of them will be processed together as a family unit. However, be careful. This doesn't mean that if the main applicant's application is approved, all the family members' applications will also be approved, okay? They may deny the application of an accompanying family member if, for example, economic dependence is not proven, or if the family relationship is not properly documented, or if it is not demonstrated that there are sufficient financial means to bring this family member. But there is also another possible strategy, which is for the main applicant to come first, apply for residency as the main applicant, and once this is granted, then apply for residency for the family members who wish to join them. This, in turn, can be done in two ways. Either the family member comes to Spain, enters as a tourist, and applies for residency from here once the main applicant has obtained theirs, or the family member waits in their country of origin, the main applicant submits the family member's application from Spain, and once the family member's favorable decision is issued, they go to the consulate with their approval, and the consulate must issue the visa, no questions asked. This last option can be one of the safest for family members because they enter Spain with their visa already stamped, the digital nomad residency obtained, and it is not necessary for them to enter as tourists, meeting all the requirements for that. They won't have to buy a return ticket, justify accommodation, prove financial means for their stay as tourists, or purchase travel insurance, etc. Therefore, for me, this is one of the best options when there is no issue, of course, with being separated from the family for a little while, which I know is not an option for some. But for those who are willing to do it, this is an excellent choice. The process is usually quite fast. The resolution period is the same as for the main applicant, 20 working days, although in practice, they often resolve it much sooner. And who can we consider as family members for the purposes of this procedure? Well, the spouse, the registered domestic partner, as long as there is an official document proving that relationship and it is up to date, children under 18 years old, or also adult children who are financially dependent on the main applicant, and the ascendants, meaning the parents of the main applicant or the in-laws, but only if you can also prove very clearly and very solidly the dependency from the country of origin. And this proof is not easy, but we have managed to obtain many residence permits for ascendants, both for parents and for in-laws. And my next stop is gonna be a place to eat because I'm really hungry now. And that's it, we're done eating. Everything was really delicious. I missed dessert since I like to finish with something sweet, but we'll have it somewhere else, and that way you can see other parts of this wonderful place, this paradise. Wow, but do you know what I'm going to do before I get back in the car? I'm gonna sit on the sand for a bit and take in the wonderful scenery. The sun is just perfect. I was eating at the restaurant in the shade, and I even got a little cold because in May in the shade, it's still not quite warm enough. But the sand, honestly, is scorching hot. And look how beautiful it is. It's so white, so inviting. All right, Goyi and I are going to lie down here for a bit, and I'll explain the next point to you. Wow, this is heavenly. Goyino, it's so nice here, isn't it? Oh, you weren't expecting a beach day today, were you? Well, he's already found himself a spot in the shade. I'm more the type to roast in the sun. All right, let me continue. From where can we apply for digital nomad residency? And where do I recommend doing it? Well, there are two clear options, okay? On one hand, you can apply for a visa from your country of origin or your country of residence. And on the other hand, you have the option to apply directly for residency from Spain by entering as a tourist and within the 90-day stay. Now, many clients have come to me for consultations convinced that they wanted to process the visa from their country of origin, and I have talked them out of that idea. And why is that? Well, because except in certain specific cases, it doesn't really make much sense to do it that way. Unless you come from a country that requires a visa to enter Spain, such as Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Ecuador, or Bolivia, in which case it might make a bit more sense to apply for the visa from your country of origin because it will allow you to enter Spain legally for a year. But be careful with this because being granted this visa does not mean that you already have your residency approved in Spain. That is, when you arrive in Spain with that visa stamped in your passport, you will still have to apply for the digital nomad residency here, and it is that residency that will be granted to you for 3 years. And be aware, just because your visa is approved doesn't mean your residency will be approved here, okay? It's a double process. And it will be the residency granted to you from Spain that will last for 3 years, which will allow you to renew and which will count towards applying for Spanish nationality. As you know, if you come from a Latin American country, you can apply for nationality after 2 years of residency. The visa, in reality, only allows you to enter Spain and stay for that first year, nothing more. That's why, imagine, even for people coming from countries that require a visa, we often recommend coming with a tourist visa, applying for a tourist visa. And once in Spain, they enter Spain with this tourist visa and then apply directly for residency as a digital nomad here. For me, it's completely unthinkable to recommend applying for the visa from your country of origin if you come from a country that doesn't require a visa, like Venezuela, Mexico, Colombia, or El Salvador, because it makes no sense at all. So you come to Spain as a tourist, and from here you apply directly for residency, which, as I said, will be granted to you for 3 years. And from that point on, the countdown begins for a possible Spanish citizenship. And furthermore, there's another very important point that I want you to understand, okay? The residency that you apply for from within Spain is not processed at the immigration offices, but rather through a different body called the Large Companies Unit, located in Madrid, the famous UGE, which is the organization responsible for handling this type of residency under the entrepreneur's law and throughout the entire country. That's why some clients ask me, Maria, if I go to live in Barcelona or if I move to a province in Andalusia, will it be more difficult to obtain this residency? Honestly, it doesn't matter where you go to live. It doesn't matter where you establish your residence. As I said, this body is located in Madrid and processes all applications on a national level. And I want to take this opportunity to say something, because when something works well, it should also be acknowledged. This body, the Large Companies Unit, works very well. They are super fast, very efficient, and our experience with them at the firm has been very positive. We get along well with them. So from here, I want to send a big hug to the officials at the UGE, and I hope the immigration office copies your system. I'll just leave it at that. Look, I'm going to get a little closer to the shore. So you can see how beautiful and clear the water is. Not even in the Caribbean, folks. And well, from here, from the seashore, I'm going to talk to you about the application process and the response time, which is super important for you to understand clearly. As I already mentioned in the previous section, my recommendation in most cases is usually to enter Spain as a tourist and submit the application directly from here. But be careful, to enter as a tourist, you're going to have to meet a series of requirements, okay? And what does this mean? It means you must be able to prove you have sufficient financial means, health insurance, a return flight, and accommodation. I already mentioned something about this earlier. And here I want to give an important warning, because this causes a lot of confusion. You can't arrive at border control and say, I'm coming as a tourist, but my real intention is to stay and apply for a digital nomad residency. And that's why I haven't brought a return flight or other required documents. You shouldn't do that, okay? You have to enter meeting all the entry requirements as a tourist. And once you are already in Spain, that's when you prepare and submit the digital nomad residency application. And here, honestly, I recommend that you work with a lawyer who specializes in this procedure, because it's a very technical process, and not just any lawyer will really know how this process works before the Large Companies Unit. Furthermore, at our firm, our modus operandi is to prepare these applications well in advance. The idea is for the person to enter Spain with practically everything organized, reviewed, and prepared. That way, once they arrive, we simply submit the application, and this greatly reduces errors and later problems. Once we submit the application to the Large Companies Unit, several things can happen. The first is that the application may be subject to a request for additional information, meaning they send us a requirement. And what does this mean? It means that the authorities are asking us for additional documentation because they want to clarify a certain point, believe that a document is missing, have detected a defect, or want to review a specific circumstance of the applicant in more detail, okay? And here I want to reassure you, if you receive a request for additional information, because this does not automatically mean that the application was poorly submitted, not at all. We receive requests for additional information, even in extremely solid applications. Simply put, there are cases where the authorities just want to gather more information. If we receive a request for additional information, we will normally have 10 business days to respond, although it is possible to extend this period by 5 more days. But honestly, I always recommend responding within those 10 business days. And here's something very important that many people don't know. The request for additional information interrupts the resolution period because this procedure has a legal deadline of 20 business days. It must be resolved within 20 business days. And if it is not resolved within that period, silence is considered approval, meaning the application will be approved. So imagine that the authorities request additional information on day 15. The countdown stops. And when we respond to the request, the period resumes until the 20 business days are completed. Although the authorities are not required to use the entire period, they can resolve the case earlier, and in fact, many times they do so within 10 business days in a very short time. Now, there is also another possibility, which is that we do not receive any request for additional information at all. In fact, many applications that are very well prepared are resolved directly without asking for any additional documentation. But I repeat, if you receive a request for additional information, don't be alarmed. Don't start thinking that your lawyer has submitted your application incorrectly. It has nothing to do with that. And honestly, one of the great advantages of applying for this residency is precisely how quickly it is processed, which is usually much faster than other immigration procedures in Spain, much faster. But I want to pause on something that I just briefly mentioned. What happens if the administration does not respond within those 20 business days? I already mentioned that what comes into play is what's called positive administrative silence. And this means that the application will be approved. And this rarely happens, that they exceed this 20 business day period. But if it happens to you, if you haven't received a response within those 20 business days, my recommendation is to wait 2 or 3 more days just to be cautious. And if the decision still doesn't arrive in that time, then your lawyer can submit a written request asking for the recognition of that positive silence. And I want to clarify something. The administration cannot issue an unfavorable decision after that positive silence has occurred, because that would go against the Common Administrative Procedure law, okay? By law. In fact, we have had a few specific cases where the administration made that mistake. That is, they issued a decision after the 20 business days had passed and did so unfavorably. We quickly filed the appropriate appeal and won without any problem, because legally it is not correct and they acknowledge that. So is the procedure and the timeline clear to you? Well then, let's move on to the next section. Wow, I feel super comfortable here, so I think I'm going to record another segment from the shore of the beach. I feel sad to leave. The sun recharges my energy and I need it since I'm always stuck in the office. Can you imagine being able to work remotely from here? I'd sign up for that. Honestly, I'd trade my office to come here every day, set up my little beach bar and work remotely from the shore. Oh my goodness. Or, well, maybe rent one of those little houses with a sea view and work remotely from there. Oh, what a pleasure that would be. But no, I work in the city, in an office between 4 walls. Oh, what a shame. But you know what? I'm going to take advantage of the relaxing sound of the sea to explain one of the trickiest points about this residency: paying taxes. Let's get to it. Paying taxes in Spain as a digital nomad and paying self-employment fees. Well, I'll also talk about the famous Beckham Law since there's a lot of misinformation about it. That's right, we're entering the dark world of taxes. And the truth is, many people consider this part to be the darkest side of the digital nomad residency in Spain. Honestly, I don't really see it that way. It's true, yes, and I always say this in every consultation. In Spain, you do pay taxes. I pay a lot myself as a freelancer, but let me also tell you something important. The welfare state that we enjoy in this country and all the public services we benefit from have to be supported somehow, right? In the end, what this residency is about is that Spain wants to attract people with high incomes. It's not like they're just giving things away for no reason. What they're looking for is to attract talent. People with high incomes, with economic capacity, qualified professionals who contribute to the country's economic development. This works a bit like a win-win, okay? You get the chance to live legally in Spain with your family, enjoy safety, stability, public healthcare, education, infrastructure, and quality of life. And in return, you contribute fiscally just like anyone else living here. Therefore, yes, it is true that you will have to pay taxes throughout your entire period of residence in Spain, and it is also true that some people may find these taxes extremely high, especially if they come from countries where taxation is lower or if they simply were not used to dealing with these kinds of tax obligations. And the real problem many times is not the taxes themselves, but rather the lack of information and advice. Because I have seen many videos on social media of people literally crying when it comes time to file their tax return, and they discover that they have to pay a significant amount to the tax authorities. And of course, this often happens because no one explained to them properly and from the very beginning how the tax system works. So yes, that's the reality. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not trying to sugarcoat it for you or sell it to you as if taxes were something wonderful. And that's precisely why I want to take this section to try to explain to you in a simple way which taxes you will have to pay as a digital nomad here in Spain, how the self-employment system works, and the topic of the famous Beckham Law. And I'm going to explain all of this relying on the knowledge and experience of my firm's tax department, okay? We have a tax department from which we handle hundreds of cases for digital nomads who have trusted us from the beginning, not only to obtain their residency, but also to properly manage their entire tax situation here in Spain. And very little, really very little, is discussed rigorously about this topic on social media. And what you mostly find are lots of people giving their opinions without actually having deep knowledge of international taxation, double taxation, or international agreements. And precisely our tax team works daily with these kinds of situations, analyzing cases of people who generate income in different countries and avoiding double taxation issues, as well as properly structuring all the tax aspects so that the client doesn't end up with unpleasant surprises later on. So yes, I honestly believe that we have more than enough authority to talk about this topic and to try to explain it to you as clearly as possible. When you are granted the Nomad visa, you will have to register as self-employed. If you have obtained it with the support of my firm, then we ourselves can continue providing you with this service, as we have already mentioned. As self-employed individuals in Spain, you will have to file the well-known Form 130 every quarter, which is basically an advance payment towards your personal income tax, IRPF. And with this form, you only declare your professional activity, that is, income minus deductible expenses related to your activity. And here I want to make something very clear. The tax authorities will only consider as deductible those expenses that are necessary for the development of your professional activity, making a clear distinction from those that are mixed with personal expenses. For example, a computer, internet, co-working software, phone service, accounting services, training, work materials, invoices from my firm. All of these would be considered expenses. But be careful, some of these expenses can only be deducted at 50% because they are also related to your non-professional life, your personal life. Your tax professional will tell you which expenses you can deduct 100% and which ones only 50%. You will also have to file Form 303 for VAT. But here, there is a very interesting peculiarity for digital nomads. Since in most cases you will be providing services to foreign professional clients, many times your invoices will not include VAT charged to the client. However, you will still have VAT paid on your professional expenses in Spain. For example, if you buy a computer, that purchase will include VAT that you will have to pay. And what does this mean? Well, in many cases, not only will you not have to pay VAT to the tax authorities, but the tax office could even end up refunding you money, okay? I also want to quickly mention the well-known Form 720, which is an informative declaration about assets held abroad. Be careful, this does not mean you have to pay additional taxes, not in every case. It is simply an informational requirement for certain tax residents who have accounts, real estate, or investments outside of Spain that exceed certain limits. Normally, taxes are only paid in this regard if the assets exceed 700,000 euros, which is a lot, but there are autonomous communities where you would be exempt up to 2 million euros. All of this needs to be reviewed. You ask me a lot about the famous Beckham Law because there has been a lot of misinformation about it on social media. Many people think that any digital nomad can automatically take advantage of it, but that's not exactly the case. In fact, this law is mainly intended for employees and completely excludes the self-employed. Moreover, it's not actually all that beneficial. There are cases where it can even mean paying more taxes depending on your income and personal situation. That's why I always tell you that this tax aspect needs to be studied completely on an individual basis before coming to Spain, okay? Preferably. Besides the quarterly and annual taxes I've mentioned, well, the payments don't end there, honestly. Self-employed individuals in Spain will have to pay their corresponding fee, which is basically the monthly contribution to Social Security. Currently, the self-employment fee operates through a tiered system based on the worker's actual income. In other words, the more you earn, the more you contribute. And the fees can vary quite a bit depending on your income level. Furthermore, this fee is not just another payment. It's important because it is precisely what gives you access to very important benefits in Spain, such as public health care, medical leave, accident coverage, maternity, retirement, and even certain types of aid or benefits for cessation of activity. And here comes some good news for those who are just starting out, for those beginning their journey in Spain as self-employed workers. Because if you register as self-employed in Spain for the first time, which is usually the case, you will generally be able to access the famous flat rate. What does this mean? It means that during the first 12 months, the fee will be reduced. It usually comes to around 80 euros per month instead of paying the full fee right away, which can easily exceed 300 euros. And in some specific cases, if your income remains low, you may even be able to keep that reduced fee for a longer period. Then, once that flat rate ends, you will move on to the standard contribution system based on your actual income. And that's it. These are all the taxes and payments you will have to deal with as a digital nomad in Spain. That's all. It wasn't such a big deal. I'm off. Let's continue the journey. In this next section, I'm going to clarify a very common question, whether or not you need private health insurance to apply for this residency. And all of this is very much related to the previous section where I talked about the self-employed quota, the fee that self-employed people have to pay, and the services they receive in return, okay? Many people mistakenly believe that for the digital nomad residency, it is mandatory to purchase private health insurance, but nothing could be further from the truth. Unlike other types of residency or stays here in Spain, private insurance is not required because the holder will be paying social security contributions as a self-employed worker in Spain. And precisely thanks to that self-employment payment, the holder will have access to the Spanish public healthcare system. And not just the holder, but also their accompanying family members. That is, both the partner and the children will also be able to benefit from the public healthcare system. And honestly, I don't need to tell you much about the Spanish healthcare system because, well, I don't know if you know this, but it's considered one of the best in Europe. And I'm also telling you this from the practical experience of many clients. Many families who come to Spain greatly value the peace of mind that comes from knowing they will have access to public healthcare, to quality public healthcare for themselves and their children. And then, regarding the schooling of the nomads' minor children, this is another topic I want to clarify because it's something that really concerns families. But I want to make it clear that in Spain, the extensive network of available schools works perfectly, okay? Your minor children will be able to enroll in school in Spain without any problem. And in addition, you will have different options. On one hand, there are public schools, which are free schools funded by the Spanish government. Then we have semi-private schools, which are half and half, and private schools, which are paid for by the user, where the price can vary greatly depending on the school, its prestige, and so on. So your children will be able to access any of these educational options. And in the case of public or semi-private schools, usually the important thing is that the minor is registered in the local census. If you don't know what registration in the local census is, I'll leave a video here where I explain absolutely everything about the padrón, a very important procedure when you arrive in Spain, okay? And so, depending on the address where the minor and the family are registered, they will be assigned to one school or another in that area. Also, something that causes a lot of confusion is whether a minor can be enrolled in school at any time of the year. Well, yes, you will be able to do it. At any time you arrive in Spain, the minor will still be able to enroll in school. That is, you won't need to wait for the start of the school year. In fact, let me share a real experience from some clients at the firm who arrived practically a month before the Christmas holidays. And between finding a place to live, registering their address, and completing all the paperwork, when their children were finally admitted to school, there were literally only 2 days left before the Christmas holidays. And do you know what happened? Absolutely nothing. The children attended those last 2 days of class without any problem at all. So really, don't worry about this because the education system in Spain works perfectly and is used to receiving foreign minors throughout the entire school year. And look, I'm already almost at the end of the strip, almost at the end of this tongue of land that separates two seas. And well, I would have loved to show you this bridge open. It's a drawbridge that allows little boats to pass from the minor sea to the major sea and vice versa. But I don't know at what times it opens during this month of May. And well, if we're lucky enough to see it open, I'll show it to you. And if not, well, I'll try to get a picture to show you. So here I'm going to talk to you about the renewal or modification of the Digital Nomad Residence Permit and the possibility of applying for Spanish nationality, okay? Once you have obtained the Digital Nomad Residence Permit, it is usually granted for a period of 3 years, which can be extended, although in some cases it may be granted for a shorter period. It depends on the duration of the contract that is submitted. For example, if the contract that links us to the company has a specific duration that is shorter, then it could be adjusted to that period. But what is most common when the application is well prepared and the activity is ongoing is to receive that initial authorization for 3 years. And here comes one of the parts that is of greatest interest to people from Latin America. After 2 years of legal and continuous residence in Spain with this permit, you will be able to apply for Spanish nationality, the Spanish passport. You could obtain the Spanish passport in a much shorter period than what is required for citizens of other countries. But be careful, I want to clarify something important here, because there is often confusion about the timelines. Being able to apply for nationality after 2 years does not mean that it will be automatically granted to you at that moment. One thing is the moment when you can submit your file, your application, and quite another is the time it will take the administration to grant or deny it. And currently, those timeframes can vary greatly. We have seen cases that have been resolved in just a few months, although those are rare, and others that have taken almost 2 years. It depends on the official assigned to your case. So then, what could happen? Well, you could reach the expiration of your digital nomad residency, complete the 3 years, and still not have received a favorable decision on your Spanish nationality application. And in that case, you will have to renew your residency in order to continue staying legally in Spain while your nationality application is being processed. So, how are these renewals going to work? Well, you will be able to renew as long as you continue to meet the requirements for this residency. And the issue of taxes is very important because it will be essential to prove that during all that time you have been paying taxes correctly in Spain and that the declared income matches the minimum financial requirements that were demanded and that you presented at the beginning. And this part is fundamental because many people think that it's just about getting the initial residency, presenting these minimum income requirements, and then they neglect the tax aspect or declare taxes on lower income. And that's where we can run into problems when it comes time to renew. And here's another very common question. What happens if I lost the client with whom I applied for residency, but I have a different one now? Well, nothing will really happen as long as you continue to generate the required minimum income. In other words, it doesn't matter so much who your client specifically is, but rather that you can demonstrate financial stability and professional continuity. I'm also going to briefly touch on, very briefly, another topic that I know interests many people, which is the possibility of modifying this permit instead of renewing it. Because yes, it could happen that once you're in Spain, your situation or your interests change. For example, imagine that while you're here, a Spanish company offers you a job and your goal is no longer to continue working remotely, but to work directly for this company. Well, in that case, there could be the possibility of switching to a general regime residence and work permit, or even to a highly qualified professional permit. You could also consider the option of a self-employed residence if you decide to start a business or launch a venture in Spain. But be careful, it has to be a viable project. In this case, profitable, scalable, and well thought out, because these modifications are not simple, okay? Self-employed. And something else that happens quite often is that once you're here in Spain, you might start a relationship with a Spanish citizen or a citizen of the European Union. You could switch to a residence as a family member of a Spanish citizen, or you could change to a family roots permit if it involves a citizen of the European Union. But all these modifications need to be studied very carefully because every case is completely different and a poorly planned approach can lead to problems. That's why, honestly, in most cases, the simplest option is usually to properly renew the Digital Nomad Residence Permit. If you come from a Latin American country, take advantage of those 2 years of legal residence to later apply for Spanish citizenship. And once you have Spanish citizenship, then you can do whatever you want. That's my recommendation, the one I always give. But of course, it's up to each person. And look, I'll take this opportunity to talk to you about the possibility of having this residence permit revoked. And hardly anyone talks about this when explaining this type of residence. That's why it's so important to properly prepare your application to get the initial approval and then to maintain that residence status correctly over time. Because as I mentioned before, this residence permit is usually granted for up to 3 years and can later be renewed if we continue to meet the requirements. But throughout its duration, this residence permit can be subject to checks and reviews that in certain cases could lead to its loss. We're going to briefly touch on the main reasons because honestly, I trust that if you manage to obtain this residence permit, you'll truly value it and do things right. There are 2 main reasons for revocation. The first has to do with tax obligations and social security, that is, not properly fulfilling your obligations to the tax authorities or failing to make the required social security contributions. And I really want to emphasize this point because a lot of people completely underestimate this part. Once you've obtained the residence permit, it's not enough to simply keep working remotely. You have to do things properly from a tax perspective in Spain. And my recommendation is that from day one, you have a good tax advisor to help you correctly file your quarterly taxes and annual returns. In our case, we usually offer an initial consultation where we do an approximate simulation of the taxes you'll have to pay, and then we provide full support afterwards once your residence permit is granted. Registration with the tax agency, registration with Social Security, management of self-employment status, filing quarterly taxes, income tax returns, everything, the entire tax process, so that you don't have any problems with the tax authorities. The second common reason for revocation is failing to meet the employment or professional requirements that led to the residence permit. And I already mentioned this in the previous section. If you obtain this residence as an employee hired by a foreign company, you must maintain your relationship with that foreign company. And yes, you can work with Spanish companies, but only as long as it does not exceed 20% of your income, as I already warned you. And be careful with this, because many people gradually start working more and more with Spanish clients and end up violating one of the fundamental requirements of this residence permit. So please be very careful, because this specific Digital Nomad Residence Permit is intentionally designed for people whose main professional activity remains entirely outside of Spain and not here, and who diligently fulfill all of their necessary tax obligations. Look, and now we are slowly passing underneath. Let's see, that very same bridge I showed you a little bit earlier today. And in the background here, you can see the house of Mr. Tomás Maestre Aznar, who, well, no longer lives there, his family does, and who was the owner of La Manga. He owned the land in La Manga, and well, then he gradually sold it off, and now what remains is that space, that large villa. And I don't know if the family still owns anything else, to be honest, but look how beautiful it is. And here I'm going to record the last part of this video, the grounds for denial and the appeals that can be filed against them. I couldn't leave out this section because although our firm has an extremely high success rate with these applications, with this type of residency, there can still be some denials. And notice that in this 2026, we still haven't received a single denial resolution for digital nomad residency. And last year, after submitting more than 320 applications, we received only 4 denials. Honestly, these are numbers we are extremely proud of because behind them there is a lot of technical work, countless hours, and a great deal of legal strategy, mind you. This year we are on the right track, but that doesn't mean we couldn't receive a denial between now and the end of the year because the authorities are becoming increasingly strict with certain profiles and specific cases as there has been a lot of deception. Above all, they are making the process much tougher for cases where the applicant is the owner of their own company. Because, as I said, there have been quite a few attempts at fraud and many people trying to fit situations that really did not meet the requirements. And in the end, that causes the large companies unit to scrutinize certain cases more and more closely, as I mentioned. So the fact that we haven't had any denials so far this year doesn't mean it's impossible to receive one. Someone will get one eventually. That's why I want you to really listen to the final recommendation I'm going to give at the end of this video, okay? But first, I'm going to explain the most common reasons why these types of cases are denied, so you can try to avoid them, alright? The first and one of the most frequent is not properly proving the required minimum income. And here I want to make something very clear. The UGE reviews this down to the last detail. I've already said it. If you're short even 20 euros, they can deny your application without a second thought. Also, it's not enough to just have the money and that's it. You have to prove real, recurring, stable, and traceable income. And speaking precisely about traceability, another very, very common problem is not being able to properly demonstrate where the income comes from. And it can even be a problem if there are too many mixed sources of income. For example, we've had clients who received payments through PayPal, Wise, or similar platforms, and then transferred the money to their personal accounts. Wow, they're going to open the bridge. Oh my, we're going to catch it. How cool. Well, let me explain quickly before they open it. So they received the money through these platforms and then transferred it to their personal accounts. And of course, this can make traceability more difficult, but with a good strategy, it can be managed. It's not opening yet. They are also being especially strict about verifying professional experience if you don't have a higher education degree. Be extremely careful with this. I already warned you about this before. If you don't have a university degree related to the activity you're doing, then you'll have to prove those 3 years of professional experience with valid public documents. Look, it's opening. Wow, it's happening while I'm still recording. Look how cool that is. Another reason for denial has to do with people who own their own business. And be careful because here the criteria are getting much stricter. Look how cool that is. Wow, that's awesome. The UGE is increasingly analyzing whether there is actually a real economic activity, whether the company has sufficient structure, whether the applicant truly has control over that company, and whether everything is properly documented. And this is where we usually apply the most legal strategy, or rather, the most strategic ingenuity at our firm. There can also be problems when there are inconsistencies among the documents submitted. For example, poorly drafted contracts, activities that don't match the professional experience, incorrectly translated documents, companies that are too new, bank statements that don't match the invoices, or simply very disorganized files. There you go, now it's fully open. Now the little boats are going to start passing through, and be careful with another very important detail, because many people think that just because a friend or someone they know got their residency by submitting just a few things and it went very well for them, the same will happen for them too. But no, every case file is a completely different world. What worked for one person might not work anymore today. The criteria are changing, and it also depends a lot on which official handles your case. Depending on the official, they may require more or less documentation. In fact, look, we can already tell how a case might end just by seeing what kind of request they make and which official is behind it. That's the benefit of experience. Now, I also want to reassure you about something. A denial does not automatically mean the end. When faced with a denial, you need to analyze the reason and decide what is most appropriate. If the reason for the denial can be resolved, then we might recommend submitting the application again if we are still within the deadline, if we still have days left out of the 90 allowed as a tourist. That's why it's so important to submit your application immediately after entering Spain. It may also be that the reason can be resolved, but it might be advisable to leave Spain, return to your home country, wait there for a few months to plan properly, and then come back. This is a good option in some cases, but clients usually don't like it very much. And finally, it may happen that the reason for the denial cannot be resolved, and you just have to accept it. At our firm, if we don't see any viability, we will be completely honest. We will never recommend an appeal if we are not confident about it. And well, in the event of receiving an unfavorable decision, it doesn't necessarily mean the end of the road. We mainly have two types of appeals available, the administrative reconsideration appeal and the contentious administrative appeal. The reconsideration appeal is filed with the same administration that issued the denial, and we have a period of 1 month to submit it from the notification of the unfavorable decision. That is to say, in this case, the administration itself acts somewhat as both judge and party, reviewing the case again. And then we also have the option of the contentious administrative appeal, which is filed through the courts and for which we have a period of 2 months from the denial. Honestly, whenever it is legally viable, we prefer to file the reconsideration appeal. Why? Because it is much less expensive for the client, and in addition, it can be resolved much faster than a judicial procedure, which can take years. Now then, let's talk about actual timelines, because it's also important for you to know this. Timeframes for the resolution of this appeal. There have been appeals that were resolved in 2 or 3 months, and others that took 6 months, 8 months, or even a year of waiting. Fortunately, the one that took a year ended up being favorable, and honestly, the wait was absolutely worth it. But of course, all these timeframes must also be taken into account when deciding which strategy to follow. And depending on the reason for the denial and the client's personal situation, it may even be more advisable to submit a new application, as I mentioned, well prepared, or even to leave Spain and return later to try again rather than starting an appeal process that could drag on for much longer. And this is precisely where the importance of good strategic legal advice comes in, because appealing is not always the best option. Sometimes the smartest thing to do is to completely rethink the case. Look at what a beautiful view we have from here to see the drawbridge. A little boat is passing by. How lovely, right? You can't say I haven't brought you to a beautiful place. Well then, either come visit Murcia or come live in Murcia. And well, let's record the last part of this video in a super cool place overlooking the Mar Menor, where there are some little houses really close to the sea. When these little houses were built, the truth is that the coastal law was nowhere to be found. But anyway, I really like this area, and in summer I like it even more because there are very few people and it's super peaceful. From here I'm going to record the last part of the video. And in this final part, I'm going to give my usual and final recommendation. In this case, since we're talking about the residence permit for digital nomads in Spain, one of the most important recommendations I can give is this one. It's about, as I already mentioned, oh, the little dog is going into the water. Oh, Gogi is about to take a swim. I'll continue. As I said, this is a very technical process, much more technical than it appears from the outside. There is a huge amount of documentation to organize, many details to take care of, and many situations that require, as I also mentioned, a genuine legal strategy. Therefore, my recommendation would be that you always carry out this procedure with the support of a lawyer, especially one who is an expert in the field. And even more so, an expert in this type of residence permits. It's no longer enough to just have a general immigration lawyer because honestly, that will make a huge difference. Be very careful because on social media, there are countless people offering help with this process and many of them aren't even lawyers. Many times what they do is attract clients and then use a lawyer's signature to submit the application. But the person actually behind it doesn't have any legal training. And you might say, well, okay, but if they have practical experience, what does it matter? Well, honestly, it does matter because legal knowledge is absolutely the foundation of all these processes. The fact that someone is truly a legal professional provides an analytical ability and technical foundation that are essential when problems, issues, requests for additional information, or complex situations arise in a case like this, okay? And believe me, it happens far more often than you might think. Second extremely important recommendation, seek advice well in advance, a lot of time in advance. Don't wait until you've already bought your ticket or until you've already arrived in Spain. For God's sake, don't make that mistake because it could easily happen that when you finally seek advice, you still don't fully meet the requirements and you might need a few months to organize certain things. For example, properly organizing your income, improving the traceability of your funds, better structuring your professional activity, or even setting up a company if you are channeling your income in a way that is not suitable for this type of residency. And that's precisely why it's so important to analyze your case several months in advance, because very often small mistakes that are easily fixable today can turn into huge problems if we wait until the last minute. And related to this, the exact timing of submitting your application is also extremely important. As I explained to you earlier, it is common to enter as a tourist and submit your application within 90 days of your arrival in Spain. But it's not the same to submit your application on the second or third day after your arrival as it is to do it when there are only 2 or 3 days left before the 90-day period is up. It's a completely different situation, and I assure you that this difference will give you a peace of mind that is priceless. At our office, we usually prepare these applications well in advance, 5 or 6 months ahead of time, and we make sure that all the documentation is properly prepared for when you enter Spain, translated, legalized. Because it can happen that once you arrive in Spain, you start preparing the application and realize you're missing documents that you can only obtain in your country of origin, which then makes things more difficult. And furthermore, submitting early has another huge advantage that I already mentioned. If a serious issue arises during the process, there may still be enough time even to reconsider the application and submit a new request. And finally, the third and last fundamental recommendation. If you want to apply for this residency, your finances must be extremely clear. The origin of the money must be perfectly traceable. I already mentioned this before, but I want to emphasize it because it is the key. Ideally, the company should pay you directly into your personal account and the deposits should be clearly visible in that account. But if they do it through a platform, don't worry, there is a possible strategy. So please take all these recommendations very seriously because they are pure gold. Apply them correctly and you will have a very high probability that your case will be approved. I'm going home. Look at this rascal, he's camouflaged among the rocks. Do you see him? He always finds his spot, huh? Such a lazy bones. Let's go, Gogi. Come on, let's go. Let's go. Well, you stay there then. And now we've reached the end of this great guide. We're already back in the city. I hope you really enjoyed the excursion and the little part of my homeland, my Murcia, that I showed you. If you come around here, visit my city, I recommend it. You'll definitely like it. You'll fall in love with it. And above all, I hope this great guide I've given you has been extremely useful, that it has cleared up many of your doubts. And I'm going to be even more ambitious. I sincerely hope that this is one of the best guides about digital nomad residencies in Spain that you have ever seen. And I promise you that if even a single person watching me thinks that, for me, all the effort will have been completely worth it. Because behind a video like this, there is a huge amount of work, many hours spent organizing information, and a lot of effort trying to explain something so complex in the clearest, most organized, and most useful way possible. So I hope you can appreciate that effort by giving me something very simple, subscribing to the channel, which you already know is completely free and can also provide you with a lot of value if you are interested in coming to live legally in Spain. I also invite you to follow me on my social media, the links to which I leave in the description of this video. In fact, just recently I published a reel where I showed several favorable resolutions for digital nomads that we received on the same day and explained some rather complex cases. I highly recommend watching it because it can serve both as guidance and inspiration for preparing your own case, whether you do it with my firm or with any other. It's very valuable information. But of course, you already know that you can count on this team, on this amazing team. I'm leaving my firm's contact information in the description. My team is highly specialized in this type of residency, and some of you already know that. And if you don't, you can read client reviews, see how we work, and get to know a bit more about our approach to supporting people through these processes. It's a very close and transparent support, which is exactly what's needed. But honestly, beyond what our reviews say, I invite you to experience it for yourselves. I'm sure you'll want to come back. And I'd also like to invite you to our next free masterclass, which we'll be holding in the coming days, where we'll explain a lot of details about applying for the Digital Nomad Residency in Spain. If you're interested in attending, to get even more information, you'll find the link in the description of this video as well. You are all invited. I want to see each and every one of you there. I'll be taking attendance, okay? Well, that's all for now. Thank you so much for making it to the end of this video. A big hug to all of you, especially my clients and my regular followers. And I'll see you in the next video, which will be just as interesting, if not more, than this one. Goodbye.